Hi, this is Brian Kim. I'm going to share with you case number 82 in the best way to do cataract surgery series. This is a moderately dense cataract. I'm going to show you mechanical fracturing, double chop, cross chop, and systematic lens disassembly of this dense cataract. So you can see this patient has a little bit of a Bell's reflex. I'm using the cotton tip to turn the eye down, and then using the corneal marker, which will help me to center and size my rhexis. I'm making my paracentesis incisions first on the right side and then the left side, making sure the incision is flat to the iris plane so it can create a nice corneal shelf, which will allow me to achieve a self-sealing incision. I'm injecting some intracameral lidocaine and then some intracameral dispersive viscoelastic to coat the corneal endothelium and flatten the anterior capsule. And this is a triplanar corneal incision. I make a vertical groove, place a blade into the deep part of the groove. Using the cannula to control the eye, I'm able to tunnel through the cornea and then turn the eye towards me and then enter. And that's the triplanar corneal incision. And then I inject some more viscoelastic to again fill the chamber. I go in with my rhexis forceps sideways. And then this is a puncture style rhexis. I puncture the center, pull the tear towards me, grasping the right edge of the tear here. Before I do that, there was some viscoelastic on the cornea, so I asked my tech to flush the cornea, grasping the right edge of the tear, creating a flap, going around circumferentially, grabbing and re-grabbing, trying to stay within the confines of the corneal mark that I made previously, which will allow me to achieve a well-centered and sized rhexis. After I finish the rhexis, I burp some viscoelastic out of the anterior chamber. And this is the Capsulorhexis hydrodissection technique. I place a cannula under the rhexis edge contra-incisionally, get a nice wave, decompress on the left side, point the tip down on the right, and then the lens begins to spin. Remove some of those bubbles. Irrigating the cornea, turning the sleeve so that it's the appropriate length. Lifting the incision with the chopper, going in with irrigation off to minimize Descemet's trauma. Removing those bubbles and then removing the surface epinuclear material, placing the chopper under the rhexis edge contra-incisionally, placing the phaco tip vertically sub-incisionally, bringing both instruments together, crushing the lens and bisecting it in half. That is the double chop, spreading both instruments apart so that the two pieces are definitely separated, placing the chopper around the right heminucleus, pulling it centrally, crushing the right heminucleus in half, and that is the cross chop. Using a little bit of vacuum to grasp that first quadrant, placing the chopper around the lens piece and then crushing it. Using a little bit of vacuum to emulsify the lens piece, placing the chopper around the lens piece once again, pulling it up, crushing it between the chopper and the phaco tip, grasping it with high vacuum and emulsifying the lens pieces. Again, using a little bit of vacuum to pull the lens pieces up and then emulsifying the lens pieces. Again, crushing the lens pieces between the chopper and the phaco tip, and then emulsifying the lens pieces. Now I'm going after the second quadrant, placing the chopper around the lens, pulling it centrally towards the phaco tip, which is deeper, crushing and bisecting that second quadrant, using a little vacuum, but then going around it with the lens first, and then pulling it against the phaco tip and bisecting that piece, using a little bit of vacuum to lift the pieces up, crushing it, and then emulsifying the lens piece. Now that the pieces are looser, using a little bit of vacuum, mobilizing the lens piece, pulling it up, and then emulsifying the lens pieces. And that's the last piece of that second quadrant, using vacuum, grasping it, crushing it, and chopping it with mechanical forces, and then emulsifying the lens piece. That's that second half of that second quadrant. I'll lift it up with some vacuum and then crushing it between the chopper and a phaco tip. So again, this is a pretty dense lens. As you could tell though, I always take my time. I don't really like to use pedal to the metal phaco with this. I like to leverage the mechanical fracturing forces to crush the pieces into smaller pieces. In doing so, in my hands, I have much clearer corneas after surgery, and I feel like it gives the patient more corneal protection this way. I notice that the iris is a little bit floppy, and so I take the chopper out and I push epinephrine. And remember, you can push epinephrine anytime during the case. If you think that there's a floppy iris, you don't have to hesitate. Just go ahead and do it anytime. Stop, and then go ahead and push that epinephrine in. So I turn that second heminucleus in front of me, place the chopper around the lens piece, pulling it centrally towards the phaco tip, which is in a deep position, and then I'm able to divide that second heminucleus. Placing the chopper around that third quadrant, pulling it centrally towards the phaco tip, bisecting the third quadrant, and then breaking it up into smaller and smaller pieces. Again, using the chopper to cut it against the phaco tip. And once those pieces are smaller, go ahead and use mechanical fracturing forces to crush them and then emulsify the lens pieces. That's that second part of the third quadrant, grasping it with some vacuum, crushing it between the chopper and the phaco tip, and then emulsifying the lens piece. So this is the fourth quadrant. You can see it's pretty mobile in the bag. But again, because I use just mechanical fracturing forces to divide the lens pieces, I don't have to lollipop the lens. I don't have to use high vacuum at all, which again, when you have high vacuum, there's a possibility you might grab something you shouldn't. And so just positioning the lens mechanically with the chopper and phaco tip around the lens piece and then crushing it, to me is really, even though it takes some practice doing it, it really is a very, very safe way to manipulate the lens pieces and crush the lens pieces. Again, because you're only using irrigation during those maneuvers. So once you position the lens piece so that the chopper and phaco tip around it, you can crush it into smaller and smaller pieces and then emulsify the lens pieces. And I really think just learning the habit of placing the chopper around the lens piece and becoming comfortable and confident and really mastering that maneuver is really the best way to be able to handle any potential sticky situation where you're having trouble with getting the lens out. At this point, because this is the last piece and this is such a dense lens, I go ahead and push some viscoelastic into the bag and to coat the corneal endothelium to protect it even more, as well as create a little bit of cushion to keep that posterior capsule back. When I activate aspiration and vacuum, I want to make sure that the lens piece is up against my tip. Otherwise, all I will be doing is just removing the viscoelastic. Once the piece is against the tip, I begin to emulsify the lens piece. I use mechanical fracturing forces to crush the lens pieces into smaller pieces and then emulsify the lens pieces. With these last fragments, I make sure that the chopper is deep in the bag to ensure that the posterior capsule doesn't come up, to act as a buffer. So I take the chopper out, push BSS in, take the phaco tip out, and go in with the INA handpiece. Start to remove the subincisional cortex. Then I start to sweep side to side around it. It's a fairly clean bag. I switched to polish mode because the pupil is a little bit on the smaller side. I can't really see underneath the rhexis very well. So I like to switch to polish mode, which will allow me to polish a little bit more confidently. Again, with these dense lenses, I worry about zonulopathy as well. I go ahead and pulse BSS into the subincisional capsular fornix with the BSS cannula. It looked pretty clean there. Now I'm injecting some cohesive viscoelastic to fill the bag. And then I use a sweep to polish underneath the rhexis edge, polishing on the left side here. And then on the right side. With these dense lenses, I do worry about zonulopathy, and so I like to put a three-piece lens in these situations in case there's some potential late dislocation. So I have to widen my incision. And then I'm placing the three-piece acrylic lens into the capsular bag. I point the bevel to the left. As the leading haptic is delivered, it's pointing to the left, but it's going out planar. I place it into the bag. As the optic is delivered, I rotate my hand counterclockwise about 90 degrees, and the optic comes out planar. I use a Maltzman now to dial the trailing haptic into the capsular bag. I go in with irrigation off, activate irrigation, and then remove the viscoelastic from within the bag. Whoa, there's a big chunk of lens material still in the eye. And so let's see what I do here. Oh, it's actually underneath the lens. I'm trying to prolapse that piece up out of the bag. And so now that you see that piece is wedged in the incision, I switch to the phaco tip and very carefully grasping it with the phaco tip with the aspiration and vacuum. And when it's on the tip, I switch to the phacoemulsification quadrant removal mode, holding it on the tip with the chopper, and I'm remove the lens piece. So now we have to switch back to the INA handpiece now. And as I do so, I make sure I go underneath the lens again, making sure there's no viscoelastic, making sure there's no fragments. Saw a little bit of wispy material attached to the posterior capsule, and I switched to polish mode to go after that. Once I cleaned the posterior capsule, I switched to Cortex mode, removing the viscoelastic from the anterior chamber. I switched to polish mode again. There's still some stubborn material underneath the lens. And then I switched to visco mode to remove all the viscoelastic from the anterior chamber. And then I'll hydrate my incision. So again, this is a pretty dense cataract. You saw I did mechanical fracturing, double chop, cross chop to carefully and systematically disassemble the lens. By doing it this way, I'm using ultrasonic energy sparingly. I'm using mechanical fracturing forces, using the chopper and phaco tip to position the lens around the instruments, crushing it into smaller and smaller pieces, and then emulsifying the lens pieces. You saw that I'm able to use a chopper to hook the lens piece up out of the bag, which provides a lot of versatility and very efficient disassembly of the lens. Again, I like to use a three-piece lens in these situations because dense lenses tend to have zonular issues, and this is the end of the case. So I hope this was helpful to you, and I thank you for your attention.